Is a former federal prosecutor. He's been following these hearings all week, and Joe joins us live from Washington. So this was the chance for both sides to lay out their closing arguments. How do you think they did?
Hi, Rashmi. It's great to join you. They did well with the material they had to work with, right? The Democrats have done a good job these past few weeks in very methodically taking credible witnesses and establishing a basic narrative. And that narrative is the president, while he had an official foreign policy with respect to Ukraine, had a parallel unofficial foreign policy that seemed driven almost entirely to provide the president with a mechanism for getting information from Ukraine in exchange for a certain amount of government activity. Maybe that was a visit to the White House. Maybe that was the release of military aid. There's a little gray area there. So with that respect, the Democrats have done well, right? Their witnesses have been largely credible, professional, nonpartisan. There were no histrionics. Nothing crazy happened during the hearings. They did fine. The Republicans, for their part, are kind of boxed in now, right? Their ability to argue no quid pro quo will be very difficult after yesterday's testimony from Ambassador Sondland. So they're kind of limited to now to say, okay, there was a quid pro quo, but it was not corrupt, and therefore there was nothing wrong with it, or there was a quid pro quo, maybe it was corrupt, but it doesn't rise to the level of impeachment and removal of a president.
Yeah, I wonder, as you point out, all of these witnesses are nonpartisan, and yet they're going up against these heavily partisan questions, right? The loaded questions. How do you think they handled it? Who handled it best? You mentioned Sondland, and we can get into him, but who do you think out of all those witnesses handled that kind of line of questioning best?
I think even working backward just from today, Dr. Hill did really well. Mr. Holmes did quite well. I think that, again, everyone kept their cool. No one really took the bait. There was no argumentative back and forth for the most part between witnesses and questioners. Everyone was respectful, at least on the surface. Dr. Hill made a point today, a very eloquent point, that we are here as fact witnesses. We're not here to give opinions. We're not here to tell you whether or not this behavior was criminal or impeachable or wrong. We're here to say, as professionals, this is what we saw, this is how we perceived it, and this is how, effectively, we processed it. Through the lens of our job as foreign policy professionals.
Yeah, I wonder if, you heard Sondland yesterday saying, yes, there was a quid pro quo. And everyone's choosing which clips they want to use, right, for what message they want to send. Did you hear anything that would lead to an impeachment, that demonstrated an impeachable offense?
It's such a subjective standard, right? We're not trying to kind of box ourselves in here to a formal federal crime, because you don't need a crime for something to be impeachable. But if we are trying to put sort of four corners on it, I think what the Democrats will present now is at least one article of impeachment to say there was a bribery-like exchange here, where the president used his formal powers as the chief executive to provide something or offer something to the Ukraine government, which was at least a visit to the Oval Office, perhaps the release of military aid, in exchange for something of value. And that value something was potential information, or at least the announcement of information being gathered about Joe and Hunter Biden. So I think those are the contours of what the Democrats will argue, plus perhaps some obstruction of justice and some other ancillary charges. Might not officially rise to the level of bribery as a federal crime, but for impeachment purposes, it's more than enough to work with.
But it does come down to the committee, doesn't it? If this makes it to the Senate, can you give us an idea of how that process works, and what do you see happening?
Well, I'm sure people who are watching this internationally are looking at this process and saying, look, it looks quasi-legal, but it seems very political. And they would be right. This is a very political process. Now, if it goes to the Senate and a trial, and I predict it will, based on this testimony as of yesterday and today, I think we'll see a lot more decorum. It will still be run by politicians, basically the 100 members of the Senate, but I think they will at least try to give the veneer of fairness. I think it will look more like a trial. You will have a Chief Justice sitting there as judge to make sort of calls about certain evidentiary questions and things like that. You'll have witnesses, and ultimately you'll have a vote by all 100 senators as effectively jurors. So I do think if it gets to that point, there will be a lot less of this running to the cameras and giving their thoughts every single day, a lot fewer speeches from politicians. It will be much more trial-like if it gets to that stage.
Okay, we'll see, Joe. Thanks. Great to get your insights. Thank you for your time.
Sure, Rashmi. Always happy to join.
Joe Moreno is a former federal prosecutor joining us live from our Washington studio. Prince Andrew steps away from his royal duties as he tries to move away from the Jeffrey Epstein controversy. It is damaging his image and his income. We have details from London just ahead on CBC News Network.